turn there in the Bible. That's where we are. We've been reading through the Bible this year, book of Esther. And as you turn there, I am reminded of a story about the former Alabama football coach and most successful football coach in all of history, Nick Saban. He married his high school sweetheart, Terry, from Fairfax, West Virginia. And a couple years back, Coach Saban and Terry went back to Fairfax. They went to a reunion. And they went back to see all of their friends in high school and chat about life. Well, he found out that Terry's other high school sweetheart was nearby. And Coach Saban always had a crush on Terry at a very early age. But Coach Saban worked at the gas station, and he was always changing oil. This was like full service gas station, so pumping gas, changing oil. I mean, had dirt and grime under his fingernails. Well, Terry, she was always prim and proper. She was the drum major. She was beautiful, and she would never date Coach Saban. Well, she dated another guy by the name of Mickey Schaefer. Well, Coach learned later about Mickey Schaefer. 42 years later, Mickey Schaefer owned a gas station. Coach Saban found out he owned the gas station. And so Coach Saban, he was thinking internally, hey, we're close to the gas station. Well, maybe we'll drive by the gas station because I don't want to miss an opportunity to do a drive-by, wave at Mickey, just to make sure Terry understands how good she has it. Coach Saban looks at Terry and she says, see, honey, there you go. There's your boy Mickey Schaefer. If you married him, that's where you'd be. And Terry looks at Coach Saban and says, no, if I married him, he'd be the head coach of Alabama football. So there you go. And behind every man is a greater woman. So there you go. All right, Book of Esther. I want to talk to you today from a subject, a chess game called life. And we've been walking through the Bible. Last week, we walked through the book of Ezra. Now, Esther is positioned inside the book of Ezra. And so written around somewhere in the 5th century BC. But what we discovered last week is that there were 50,000 exiles from the Persian Empire, Babylonian captivity, that went back into Jerusalem. But it begs the question, what happened to the other 1 million Jews who remained in the Persian Empire? It's a good question. That's where we get the book of Esther. All right, that's the context of the book of Esther. And it's here in the book of Esther that we discover 3 powerful truths about life. So if you're taking notes, 3 powerful truths about life. And the first should give us a lot of hope and a lot of encouragement. Number one, we must entrust supernatural providence. We must entrust supernatural providence. Moms, if you were just able to understand that truth, your children and your husband would not render so much anxiety if we entrusted supernatural providence. In other words, look, God has a plan, God has a purpose for all of His people, even when the people didn't go back. See, we probably didn't think about what happened to the 1 million people who didn't have the courage enough to take the step to go back to Israel, but God didn't forget. God didn't move on. God still has a plan for those who didn't have the courage to take the next step. And so we look at the book of Esther, and it opens up with a Persian king named Xerxes, or Ahasuerus. Xerxes, he's known for his wild parties. He always looks for an opportunity to have a wild party. Well, Xerxes was married to a beautiful queen named Vashti. This is the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. So he's married to Vashti, he loves Vashti, and he wants to show Vashti off at this wild party. And so he thinks that he can get Vashti to come and walk around in the presence of all of these men only wearing her crown. And she says, oh no, buddy, I'm absolutely not going to do that. I refuse to do that. Well, if you refuse to do anything the king says, guess what? You could be murdered. But she refuses. So Xerxes doesn't really know what to do. So he gets all of his people, or all the eunuchs that served him, and all the people who spoke into his life. What do we do? She said no to me. They say, take her crown, place her crown over here, and place her under arrest. So that's exactly what happens. Well, in the meantime, Persia goes to war to the Spartan Greeks. They lose over 20,000 troops, and Xerxes gets lonely, and he misses Vashti. What do we do? We're in this war, and all of our men are going back, and they're being with their family. I have nowhere to go. And so for all the men in the room, this is where the war action movie 300 comes from. And it's loosely based off of this battle. This is Sparta. And this brings us to Esther chapter 2. This is what Xerxes does. Esther chapter 2, verse 5 says this. There was a Jew in Susa, that's Iran, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away from Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. Verse 7. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther. Hadassah is her Hebrew name. Esther is really the name of a foreign Babylonian god, Ishtar. But Hadassah means myrtle. So if you know somebody named Myrtle, you got a grandmother named Myrtle. This is Esther, okay, associated with peace, love, and prosperity. So Esther, the daughter of his uncle, that's Mordecai, for she had neither father nor mother. All right? The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So now, here's the concept. Xerxes wants to throw a beauty pageant. Seriously, 2,500 years before the reality show we know as The Bachelor on ABC aired, the Persian Empire had a reality show called Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire? Xerxes. That's exactly what happened in this crazy story. Who wants to marry Xerxes? Who wants to get the rose? And thousands of young girls gathered at the king's palace to win. Well, Mordecai takes Esther to the beauty contest. And guess who gets the rose? Or in this case, guess who gets the crown? Verse 17 says, the king loved Esther more than all of the women. She won grace and favor to his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Now look, I've got a lot of questions about the book of Esther. The book of Esther doesn't even mention God. The book of Esther doesn't mention prayer. And the Persian Empire were all about pragmatics. Whatever works. And so we don't know a lot about the context of the day, but here's what we know looking back. That God is planning. God is positioning Esther. God is protecting his people even though they don't realize he is protecting. And I think that's good news. It's good news for us. So write this under point 1. God has divinely positioned you for such a time as this. In the same way that he has positioned Esther for such a time as this, God has positioned you exactly where you are for such a time as this. Moms, God has positioned you for such a time as this. When you feel like God is out of control, Esther reminds us that God is still in control. He's working. He's weaving. He's positioning you even when you don't even see it. That's number 1. Be faithful when others are not. We must entrust supernatural providence. That's number 1. Number 2, here's the bad news. We must expect satanic plotting. We must expect satanic plotting. Now we meet the villain of the story in Esther chapter 3. Esther chapter 3, says this, after these things, King Ahasuerus, that's Xerxes, promoted Haman the Agagite. Dun, 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 dun. Kids, you know this is evil. This is the villain, all right? The son of Hamadatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. The enemy is advancing. The enemy is advancing. All right? So the context is that Haman, he gets promoted. All right? So he's promoted, and Xerxes says, okay, everybody can bow down to you. So Haman, he gets the big head, and he wants to be worshipped, and so everybody's bowing down to Haman. Well, guess who gets upset? Mordecai. And Mordecai says, absolutely not. I will not bow down to Haman. So Haman hates Mordecai. Not only that, he hates all of Mordecai's people. And so he wants to exterminate all of Mordecai's people, the Jews. All because Mordecai would not bow the knee. But Xerxes, he agrees to Haman's request, and he gives Haman the signet ring, the royal stamp of approval. So, how do you think Mordecai feels? We're in trouble. I'm in trouble. I don't know what to do. I mean, this is a depressive Prozac moment. He's devastated. He puts on sackcloth and ashes. He's weeping in the courts. And Esther finds out about the plot. Esther finds out. She's upset. She wants to confront the king. But if you confront the king without him knowing, guess what? You'll be put to death. So she doesn't know what to do. In Esther chapter 4, verse 13, it tells us what Mordecai says to Esther. And this is it's getting good. Verse 13. Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. You'll be murdered. If you do this, if you go to the king and don't let him know, you will be murdered. Verse 14. But if you, Esther, keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther, rise to the occasion. This is your moment to shine. This is the moment to be faithful. You either step up or step away. You either have the courage or be a coward. You either lead or you lament. You either have character or deal with the calamity. It's a lot easier just to live life and pretend like nothing's wrong than to be devoted and to be faithful. But moms, she was devoted and she was faithful. Why? Because look, she knew her children hung in the balance. The future generation of all of God's people hung in the balance of her decision to be faithful. Verse 15. Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews that are found in Susa, that's Iran, hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days. In other words, let's go to God. Let's seek God. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. I love that. Love that response. Hey, I'm faithful, but if I die, I die. In other words, I would rather die faithful than to live unfaithful. Is that your mentality, church? She says, I'm just going to be faithful to what I'm called to do. Now, it doesn't say this in the text, but I think at this point, Queen Esther, she knows she's only where she is as the queen because of divine providence. And if God has taken care of me this far, he will take care of me the rest of the way. And so she says, if I perish, I perish. So here we go, chapter 5. She goes to the king. Here's what she says in verse 2. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing at the court, she won favor in his sight. She held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And the king said to her, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you even to the half of my kingdom. Now, this is where Esther's brilliant. She knows exactly what she needs to do. She says, hey, let's throw a party. She knows that's the love language. Let's have a party between me, Haman, and the king. Let's throw a feast. And in the meantime, Haman over here, he's creating gallows to hang Mordecai. All right, he knows he wants to get rid of Mordecai. So Satan continues the plot, and that leads us to point three. Point 3, so we expect satanic plotting. And number 3, we must experience sovereign protection. Experience sovereign protection. And this story is stranger than fiction. That's how we know it's real. You can't make this stuff up. Esther has the banquet. The king has insomnia. And so he starts reading historical documents. And he reads about Mordecai saved his life. And so he's like, well, Mordecai saved my life. What did we do for him? We give him money. We give him a position. And they say, we haven't done anything. And so they say, well, we need to do something. In the meantime, Haman he's got the gallows made. He's ready to tell the king that he wants to hang Mordecai. He gets to the king, and the king says, hey, oh, by the way, what should we do to honor somebody who has protected my life? Well, Haman thinks that the king's talking about him. And so he says, let's throw a big parade. Let's put a royal robe on him. Let's parade him around the town. And he says, that's a great idea. Go get all of that ready for Mordecai. And what do you think Haman thinks at this point? He's like, what just happened? And that leads us to Esther chapter 7, where they're sitting around the table having a feast. The king, Haman, and Esther. And Esther tells the king, we've been sold out. My people are going to be destroyed and annihilated. And this is what we read, Esther chapter 7, verse 5. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, who is he and where is he? Who has dared to do this? And Esther says, a foe and an enemy. And I believe that she points right over to Haman. And she says, this wicked Haman. Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The king ran out, slams the door, full of wrath. Haman gets on all four, begs for his life in front of Esther. The king's eunuch comes in, places the head covering over Haman, and leads him out to the gallows. Listen, that was created for Mordecai. Isn't that interesting? Now, I want to teach you something theological. There's a word called typology. Typology is a theory where history records Jewish events that symbolize the New Testament. All right? So something happens in the Old Testament that symbolizes the New Testament. Now, watch this. The gallows that were created by the enemy to murder Mordecai became the gallows that judged the enemy, Haman. Do you follow me? That's what the gallows were, an instrument of death. Now, what in the world does that have to do with typology? Well, 2,000 years ago, the enemy created a cross to crucify the Son of God. You follow me? And so just like the instrument that Satan made to kill Jesus, it was the cross of Christ that God created for salvation. Satan was hoodwinked. The very instrument of death that he created became the instrument of salvation, just like the gallows. Queen Esther moves into Haman's house. The king takes his signet ring from Haman, gives it to Mordecai, and the king issues an edict, decrees that all the provinces should protect the Jews. Now, the problem was not everybody in the 200 provinces accepted that. They still liked Haman, some of them. In fact, over 20,000. But the tables turned. The Jews won the battle. And Esther saves the day. Now listen, no matter how Satan arranges the plans and the pieces, guess what? The chessboard always belongs to God. We can be rest assured that God is working. Satan's plan will always fail to God's providence. Every single time. So we can expect the satanic plotting, but we will experience sovereign protection. Can you pray with me? With heads bowed and with eyes closed this morning, I'm reminded of Genesis 50 verse 20 that says, what the enemy meant for evil, God meant it for good. What the enemy meant for evil, God meant it for good. That all of us today, that we are carrying our own gallows. We're carrying our own cross. That the enemy is plotting against us. But the Lord is using that as an instrument of salvation. God has a purpose. God has a plan, and we call that plan providence. Jeremiah says, I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. And this morning, that hope and that future is eternal life. But not just eternal life, but abundant life here.